Hi, I'm John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my channel. And today I'm delighted to be continuing in my video series about bisexuality or bi plus identity. Even more delighted to be returning back to the subject of the first video, which I did was around connecting with a bisexual identity within a straight-facing, straight-passing relationship or marriage. And even more delighted to have a very special guest on today to talk about that subject. His name is Robert Brooks Cohen. Rob, welcome. Thank you very much for coming on the channel.
Nice to be here, John. Thank you. That's a wonderful topic that doesn't get discussed enough, and it's a topic I've been focused on for a while as well.
I mean, I'm listening to your book at the moment on an audio book. It's absolutely brilliant. So I really would suggest if people are really interested in this area to pick up a copy. We certainly will talk about that. But just generally about
Cool.
you are, of course, a podcaster, Two Bi Guys podcast you do. Of course, an author. We'll get to talk about the book. Writer in the past, and I think you're doing writing projects as well. And I see stand-up comedian from Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very brave. Of all those things, perhaps that's the bravest, Rob.
Possibly. And it's something I never would have done years ago, but now is like so much fun and so
Right.
fulfilling. And it is related to the podcast and sexuality because I couldn't have done the stand up had the other things not come first. Like I realized that because I was sharing vulnerably and authentically on the podcast, that was actually step one of comedy. And many people don't realize that you need to be vulnerable and authentic to do comedy. And once I realized that, I was like, oh, I can do this. I know how to write a joke. The hard part is the authenticity, but I've been working on that for years. So
I mean, perhaps you could tell us about yourself more generally. I've said a few things there. I'm sure there's lots more besides, but kind of taking us up to the book. So, Bisexual
cool.
Married Men, Stories of Relationships, Acceptance and Authenticity. Yeah, if you could tell us a bit about your journey and how you got to write the book.
Yeah, sure. So it's all connected. So I'll tell the brief version, which is I identified as straight for many years until around my early 30s. At 29, for a while I've felt comfortable dating women, and knew I was attracted to women, and I thought of sexuality as binary. So I just kind of ignored my same-sex attraction to men, and I downplayed it, or I just thought everybody thinks about that sometimes, right? But then at age 29, I kind of had this thought like, I don't want to turn 30 without exploring this or seeing what it is. And so I explored it and I realized, oh, this feels so similar to being with women to me. Why did I think it would be so different? And a lot of things just started to unlock and unravel from there. I realized that gender is not nothing, gender, I won't say it means nothing to me, but I have attraction to people of all genders potentially. And I came out as bi in my early 30s. I started to realize that there weren't a lot of people talking about this, especially for men. Like I wanted to listen to a bi podcast by a bisexual man, and there wasn't anything I was connecting with. So my friend Alex and I started this podcast just because we wanted to talk about it and no one else was. We started Two Bi Guys. He eventually got a job at the Trevor Project and fell away from the podcast. So I rebranded it Two Bi Guys, Buy One Bi Guy. That's been going since 2019. And then during the pandemic, I got married to my partner, my wife. And I kind of started to realize I was getting a lot of comments on the podcast and direct messages on social media from bisexual men who were married to women. And they would tell me their story or tell me about their marriage, or, many of them are only out to their wives or not out to their wives or out to their close circle, but they tend to pass for straight in a marriage to a woman. And I just kept getting so many messages. I like couldn't ignore it. And in the middle of the lockdowns and the pandemic, I started reaching out to these guys and asking if I could interview them. I wasn't sure why. I wasn't sure if it was for the podcast or something else. But eventually, over a couple of years of like pondering that question, I realized this could be a book. So I turned those interviews into a book. The book is like mostly an oral history. So it's 13 interviews with by men who are or were married to women. And then I kind of interweave that with my own story and some of my thoughts on queerness in general and bisexuality. And so that's the book, which was published at the end of 2023.
It's, as I say, I think it's an amazing book for all kinds of different reasons, really. I mean, I'm only part of the way through listening to it, but just the variety of different stories as well, because
Yeah.
everybody's experience is so different. But also, there are some themes that will run through it too. I mean, the things that you write as well, your kind of narrative around things is also great because you were a writer or are a writer, aren't you? So,
Yeah.
because you can really tell that that's the case. I think you write very clearly, honestly, openly, in a way that's trying to get people to understand.
Well, it's funny because like in college, sorry, there's construction outside my door. I don't know if you
I
can
can't
hear
hear it.
it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I was a psychology major and a film major. That was my dual major. And like, I never really knew how those would come together, but they definitely have in my life in many ways. And this book is one of them. Like, I kind of have this psychology, scientific mind background and interest in like studying things and
Yeah.
breaking down the statistics and figuring out what's going on. But I also am a storyteller, and I
Mhm.
and I think especially when it comes to this stuff and queerness, like you can throw 100 statistics at people and it's important to know the landscape, but that is not what's necessarily going to change hearts and minds and really connect with people. What they'll connect with is real human stories and a
Mhm.
narrative. And so I that's how this book came about, was like as I was talking to these guys, I realized, wow, these stories are fascinating and there's a drama in the stories, and I just wanted to put them forth as authentically as I could, with some of my commentary. But I hope the experience of the book is like 13 pretty dramatic stories and you don't know where they're going and they're very human.
It's interesting that you said about statistics and that side of things, because you kind of start the book with a lot of that. And I had on my list of things to talk about in order, actually, the first being the numbers, really, only because I think numbers and statistics, we don't have to, you don't want to, but can be very helpful from the point of view of an awareness of the sort of numbers of people that can be involved here. I mean, one of the numbers, or a
Yeah.
couple of the numbers that I used in the first video, which I did, which, as I say, was around connecting with a bisexual identity within a straight facing relationship. I'm sure it was like 9 out of 10 bi plus people are in sort of mixed gender
Yeah.
relationships, something like that, or straight passing
Yeah.
relationships, and the majority of them also haven't told. And I guess we'll come on to talking about that, why that might be, and why it might be
Yeah.
important to connect both with self,
Yeah.
as far as self acceptance, but also community and others, and particularly a part of the partner that somebody might be with.
First of all, 57% of the LGBT community identifies as bisexual,
Mhm.
which like doesn't surprise me, but I think that does surprise a lot of people because like you hear about gay, lesbian, and transgender, the other letters, much more.
Mhm.
And yet the B is more than half of the community. It's a majority of the community. And that also, by the way, includes many trans people. Majority of the LGBT community is bi. And yes, you're also correct. About 9 out of 10 bi people who are in a relationship with an opposite or different gender partner. And that may be changing among young people, but that's where it is at the moment. And it makes sense for a lot of reasons we can get into. But then also, let me do a few things. The number of bi people is growing with every new generation. A third of 18 to 34 year olds, this was actually like a 5 year old study, so now age that up a little, but a third of them identify as a 1 through 5 on the Kinsey scale. So somewhere in the middle. Whereas like among older people over 60, only 7% identify in the middle of the. So we went from 7% to 34%, which
Mhm.
is kind of a lot. And then also, like you said, bi people are much less likely to be out. So 75% of gay and lesbian people are out to all or most of the important people in their lives. Only 19% of bi people are out to all or most of the important people in their lives. And only 14% of bi men are very out in that way. So that and that's because most bi people say that their orientation is not as important to their identity. Only 20% of bi people say that that's important, an important part of their identity, very important, whereas 50% of gay and lesbian people say it's very important. So I don't know if it's the cart before the horse. Like, what is it? Like, maybe it is less important, but I actually think bi people are conditioned to believe that this isn't as important and we downplay it and we come out less often. But actually, there's some disconnect there. Like, I feel that it is really important to my identity, even if I'm in a straight passing marriage, and that my queerness matters, and almost more sometimes when people see me as straight. So there's some kind of disconnect that I'm hoping to bridge by like creating more awareness and talking about this more. Are those good statistics? Do you want any more? Those are pretty good.
Those are great statistics. I think you have illustrated the point.
It's like the
Yeah.
growing number of queer people is being driven by identification. Like the numbers of gay and lesbian people is pretty consistent. The
Mm.
thing that's increasing the most in the last 10 years is bi identification. And I
Mm.
think something like 75% of Gen Z queer people are
Mm.
bi. So
Okay.
it's 57% overall, but it's like 75% of
Mm.
queer Gen Zers.
Mm. And I suspect that's purely because culturally, environmentally, in a lot of environments, it's just easier to say now. I don't think it's not become more common. I was talking to my wife actually, and she was saying that she's a teacher, and children used to get hit on the hand for writing with their left hand. So very few children wrote with their left hand, if any. And
Yeah,
now lots of
right.
children write with their left hand, and it's not because children are suddenly more likely to write with their left hand. It's because they don't get a smack anymore with a ruler on their hand if they
Yeah.
use it. And
Yeah.
somewhere there's an analogy there, I think, with bypass.
Oh, I've used that exact analogy with left-handedness often. It's a great analogy.
Okay.
Like, I think that the fluidity, sexual fluidity has always been there.
Mm.
It's just that people weren't identifying under this label because it's definitely become more accepted and more understood. I didn't think it was real when I was growing up. So how could I identify that way? And now people grow up seeing it as valid. And also, gender itself is becoming a more fluid concept. And those two things kind of are going hand in hand. Not that bi people are necessarily changing their gender, those are two separate spectrums, but there's an understanding that if gender is fluid, sexuality must be. And if sexuality is fluid, gender is. So,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a link there.
Yes. I mean, going back specifically to the majority of bi plus people being in mixed gender relationships, I have had people contact us, they do with you, because of the videos that have been on the channel and things. And some people say, why would I bother coming out, so to speak? So I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? A couple of things in your book, but I think this might have been you was saying that in terms of with your romantic partner, you think it's necessary to tell them. I wonder what your reflections are about that and how important it is.
Yeah, it's a really good question and something a lot of people I'm coaching are working on and struggling with. And it's funny, I don't know if I use the word necessary. I wouldn't use that now. Maybe I did. I mean, I wouldn't call it necessary, but I would say it's like very important. And like I would almost reframe it as like, what do you want your primary partnership or marriage or relationship to be? To
Mm,
me, what I want those relationships to be are a safe space where I can feel totally myself and share everything with someone, and that they would love and accept me no matter what I shared, and that like I don't want to have to hide anything from my primary partner. That's like sort of what that is to me, is that's the person I can share everything with. And so if that's how you look at it, then yeah, what is the point of hiding something? That said, like when you're ready, there's a timeline for everything, and especially if you're have entered into a relationship without sharing this,
Mm.
then we have to think about why and what are your intentions and how might the other person react and when is it safe for you to do that. But I do think that, like, yes, everyone I've worked with and everyone in the book, they are happy they came out to their primary partner if they do. And they're struggling before they do. When they haven't yet done it, there's a struggle and there's something that's not aligned. And there's a fear sometimes that their partner will react negatively or won't want to be with them. There's a fear of abandonment. And sometimes that does happen. Like sometimes coming out to a partner who didn't know, that kicks off a series of events that lead to the relationship changing or ending or
Mhm.
divorce. And even among those guys that I've talked to for the book and in coaching, they don't regret it
Mm.
because whatever the fear was about that relationship, like being yourself and being able to share this is so important and really valuable and healing. And it's related to your mental health in so many ways, just like not censoring yourself, being yourself,
Yeah.
loving yourself, loving another person. Like how the hell are you going to love somebody else if you can't love yourself? That's what RuPaul
I
says.
watched that show. Yeah.
Yeah. For the guys that come out and stay together, sometimes there's a struggle, sometimes there's confusion and crying and
Mm.
things to work through. And, why didn't you tell me this sooner? And for many guys, they were still processing it for many years and they didn't know what it meant. But on the other side of that struggle and that communication and whatever needs to be said, there's always a deepening of the relationship and more authenticity and more love in both directions. And that has even been true for couples that I've seen who have gotten divorced. Like there's a couple in my book who got divorced and they're closer than ever as friends and co-parents. And
Mhm.
what they had before under this container of marriage was not as deep or intimate as it is now. Even though
Mhm.
like it included sex and it included living in the same house, actually the place they're in now, divorced, is more intimate and authentic and special.
Mm. I mean, I suppose, how do you ever know whether you are fully loved? Well, you don't know that you're fully loved, do you? If there's always a part, and a part that's so
Yeah.
important in terms of identity or sexuality that may remain hidden. There's different experiences, as you say in the book. No, but this thing about how it gets lived within relationships and the ways that people do that, I think is an interesting one to look at. I guess with your coaching clients as well, there's the first thing probably about self-acceptance and how somebody frames it
Yeah.
themselves. I mean, Robin, who I was speaking to yesterday, we were talking about her
Hi,
definition of
Rob.
bisexuality, which is a helpful definition. It seems to resonate with a lot of people, but I guess that's about someone's own experience themselves, their own frame. And then there
Mhm.
is relationship with others, and particularly about romantic partners and how it's lived and how it gets integrated.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, we love Robin Oakes. Her definition of bisexuality is mine. I love it. That's the one I use all the time. There's so many reasons why it's great. It's about the potential for attraction. Doesn't have to be to the same degree to this at the same time. Anyway, lots of fluidity and diversity under her definition, which is great. What I also love about her definition is she doesn't say bisexual people are this. She
Mm,
says, I call myself bisexual because da 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 da
mm,
da.
mm,
I recognize in myself the potential to be attracted
mm,
to more than one gender.
mm,
And truly like I used to say, oh, everyone's a little bit bi. And I don't say that anymore because it's actually about how you identify. And you're
mm,
bisexual if you say you are, and you're
mm.
not if you say you're not. And that's what it is. It's like Harry Potter and the Sorting Hat. The Sorting Hat said there's some Slytherin in there, but Harry said, no, I want to be Gryffindor. And you get to be Gryffindor regardless. Like you get to choose. And if you notice the potential for attraction to more than one gender, you can choose bi. That's valid. And if you notice that and you don't want to choose bi, that's your choice and that's valid too.
Mhm.
And there can be fluidity within gay and straight and other labels also. And the label we choose is about how we want to identify in the world and why. And that's the whole other discussion. But it's your choice. Okay. Now to get to your real question,
Yeah.
which is about like integrating this into relationship. So, I mean, this is what I work on with clients primarily is like most of my clients are bi men who are in a relationship who want to integrate this more and be more out in some way. So, like, number one is about being open and honest with their partner. Like, that's sort of step one. And for people who don't have that already, that just unlocks a whole new world because you can be yourself, you can share this with someone and bounce ideas around and see what they think and what they're comfortable with. And you don't censor yourself. Like, I think so many men, especially not just about sexuality, but in the culture we live in, men will censor themselves and will have feelings that they don't acknowledge verbally or that they push down. And I didn't know the toll that was taking on me until I came out and I was free to say anything that popped into my head. Suddenly I realized, oh, I've been having all these thoughts that I suppressed, that I didn't share. And that actually was taking quite a toll on me. So, like, that's step one. Step two often is a discussion of non monogamy. And sometimes that's because that's how people want to live this out and experience it. And some people do need to explore this physically, even if they're already in a monogamous marriage. Like, especially for guys, I think, who didn't get to explore this at a younger age, who are now just coming to terms with it and realizing, oh, I had these thoughts back in high school and I didn't act on them. And actually, like, I want to see what it's like. I want to feel what it's like. That can be a desire for many men. And sometimes they'll try it and that's all they need. They know what it feels like. They can go back to monogamy. And sometimes they try it and they realize I am non-monogamous or polyamorous by nature. And
Mhm.
the relationship spectrum is another way to identify yourself, and it's unique to each person. And it also requires people to consent and a partnership to happen. So, like, integrating non-monogamy can be part of how this plays out, either long term or short term. And then even if some bi men want to come out to their partners and don't want to open up their marriage, but their wives will assume that they do. And so even when guys are like, "No, I'm monogamous. I'm only into you. I just want you to know that I'm bi and I want to be visibly bi."
Mm.
Their wives will often say, "Well, are you sure? Do you want to talk about non-monogamy?" So the conversation comes up
Yeah.
almost universally, regardless of where it leads. And then the third thing is just like being more visibly bi and queer and having bi community.
Mm.
This is like, it goes into many different things based on different people and their lives, but a lot of guys I meet, they want to go to more queer spaces. They want to be more visibly queer. They don't necessarily want to go around screaming, "I'm bisexual" to every single person they meet, but they want to find ways to connect with that in their daily lives. And they want to meet other bi people. They need community, whether that happens as part of a married unit and you go do stuff together, or they go off on their own and have their bi guy time. Being more out in the world is often sort of that third step that really connects you to the community.
Yeah. I think coming on to a bit of community as well and talking about that would be interesting because it is something that people ask a lot about community and where is it. Just going back to something that you said, the thing about sexuality and sex, it does seem to come up. And I was thinking, why, when there are conversations about bisexuality, does it always come down to sex? And then I think, well, it has got the word sexuality in it, which I guess is the thing. But actually, if you're looking at the romantic side of things, what somebody might think within a straight passing marriage, I guess, might be, well, if there is something sexually not being lived out. But also, I think if somebody decides, well, sexually, I want to remain monogamous, something that I've never really heard talked about is what about the romantic part that would
Mhm.
fall in love with someone of the same sex? That seems to be, what about the expression of that part? I think is
Mhm.
interesting to me. But
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Yeah. It's a great question. You don't hear about that as much, but I think it's just as important. So like the basic framework of this question is that like there are two sort of different scales, like sexual attraction and romantic attraction. Sorry, is
Mhm.
that very loud? Okay. There's the
It's
con
okay. I mean, I can hear it a little bit, but it's not
okay.
louder than you. So yeah.
Okay, good. It's louder for me than it is in the
Is it
microphone.
it's
Okay.
distracting for you?
I'm working on
You're okay.
it.
It's a
This is
shame.
like it's a metaphor for life of like focusing amidst the distractions and chaos of life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there's a sexual attraction and romantic attraction, and we often conflate those two things in this idealized version of love and, romantic love. They often go together. I am sexually attracted to and romantically attracted to my wife,
Mm,
but they don't always have to go together, and they can fluctuate at different levels. And sometimes people are romantically monogamous, but sexually non-monogamous. That's like
mhm,
extremely, extremely common. I think
mm,
that's probably most people.
mm,
And that's normal and okay. And, then a lot of people are like swingers, right? Or like some version of that where they have a primary partnership. They don't form or they try not to form romantic relationships with other people, but they have sexual relationships. Then there's sort of what you just described, which is the reverse of that, which is like, what about people who are sexually monogamous, but then have deep romantic or emotional connections with other people? And I
mm,
actually think that this happens way more than we acknowledge. I think this happens all the time in straight monogamous heteronormative relationships. And like part of what queerness has done for me is blur these lines between friendship and romance and these different categories of relationships that we
yeah.
have. We're like, oh, okay, well, this is a friendship, so it doesn't threaten my marriage. But
Mm,
actually, a friendship can be really, really deep and intimate and emotional and
mm,
sometimes even romantic. And
mm,
like, how do we even know when it's crossing those lines? And, heteronormativity forces us to kind of go, yes, this is a friendship, it's over here. But I think people find ways to get what they need out of different relationships within whatever confines they're in. And so people do have romantic feelings for their friends or maybe even a coworker. And maybe they'll say, like, I'm not going to cheat on my partner, so we can't have sex. But
mm,
actually, there's like intimacy there sometimes that sometimes is acknowledged and sometimes isn't. And so, like, I think all of this is possible, and the lines get blurred, especially when you want to blur those lines. But even when people put them into strict categories, the lines
yeah.
are blurring anyway.
Mm. Yes, it's just not human beings, is it? I think we're all
Yeah.
realizing. But I mean, one of the things that when we were sort of exchanging emails about before is you were saying about those marriages which tend to stay, if we're looking at marriages or long-term committed relationships, which tend to stay intact in these sorts of situations. So I guess somebody discloses that they're bipolar and talks about it. What would you say about that? Ones that tend to last? Because I think when you said about change, they might change. I guess they're always going to, aren't they?
Hmm. Hmm.
Even from the point of view of the other partner, but also the person themselves that has disclosed something that forever has
Yeah.
been hidden or they've been ashamed of, they are going to be significantly different for the rest of their lives, I think,
Yeah.
romantically.
Yeah.
And in fact, as you said, in terms of improvement, probably more loving, I suspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so, as long as they're open to that change. I think that like when people get locked in to like, this is what a marriage is supposed to be, and this is what love is supposed to look like. And it's easy to get caught up in that in the society we live in that
Mm,
has this romanticized idea of like, monogamous marriage and love. like, oh, we should have a house, we should have kids by this point, this like relationship ladder, we should be doing this together and not doing these things with other people, like should. When we're locked into that, then it's very difficult to deal with change. And it's very difficult to like be your authentic self and accept your partner as their authentic self if it strays from that
Mm.
romanticized notion of love even a little bit. And so, like, I think what leads to lasting partnership is like openness to change and like some acceptance of like things might not be exactly how I envisioned it, but do I really want to go through this journey with this person? And it's like a commitment to do that, or not, or is the vision more important than the person? And when you really commit to the person and going through whatever it is together, that's when it that's when you stay together. And like something Dan Savage says that I think makes a lot of sense, and I think is somewhere in the book, maybe in the second half,
Yeah.
is like it's really about having a shared story that you're telling. Like I have a narrative of my life and my identity, and each person has their own. And a relationship is about having a shared narrative. And when something like this comes up, you have to kind of rewrite the narrative because it's not what you thought.
Cool.
Especially if you weren't out and this is a new thing. Then there's that period of talking about it and working through it and processing it. And the couples that end up staying together are the ones that find a shared narrative that works for both of them. And then they move forward with that story. And the couples that can't work it out are the ones that can't find that shared narrative. And that's like valid too. Like maybe that means the partnership wasn't right in the long term, or it should shift into a friendship. It doesn't mean that marriage or relationship was a failure. It just means maybe it's run its course in its current form. And maybe
Mm.
the shared narrative has to be we're ending this marriage and because it wasn't working for these reasons, and we're continuing as co-parents or friends or acquaintances. And that whatever it is, you're going to come to a shared narrative, whether it's
Sure.
together or apart.
Mm.
And so it's really about like telling that story and it being authentic. And if you're telling a story that isn't authentic to one or both people, it will start to shake apart, and those cracks will come out eventually,
Yeah.
or it'll affect your mental health, and you'll be in a marriage with a shared story that you're not happy in.
Mm. But I guess if it's not authentic, I would say something's not authentic if it's not truly felt, isn't it? And really, this is all, if you're talking about romance, it is love, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
fundamentally, it's an emotion. It's all an emotional experience, isn't it? Something you said
Yeah.
about, or
Yeah.
just generally about marriages, I think you mentioned it in the book. It's kind of an aside, but I thought it was interesting that as far as the sort of marriage benefit, so the benefit psychologically,
Oh
emotionally,
yeah.
being married doesn't exist with bi plus people. Is that sometimes I remember don't remember
Huh.
things correctly, but I think that was in the book.
No one's asked me about that bit in a while, so I kind of forgot what's in there. I have to look it up again. But that's possible. Did I write
You did
that?
like
You have to
that.
tell me.
But just it makes
Interesting.
sense, I guess, from what we were talking about, I suppose, which is that to be within something where somebody's having to hide or look away from things or not say something, where the expectation would be that it is about openness and honesty and fully being loved, spending all your time with
Right.
somebody, and that's a part. I can see how that would really chip away at the additional benefits that committed relationships might bring. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense to me. It's coming back now. Like I think that probably what that's related to is the only 14% of bi men being out to most of the important people in their lives, where it's like, yeah, the marriage benefit isn't gonna happen for a bi person if they're not fully themselves and
Yeah.
authentic with their partner. So
Mm.
that makes a lot of sense to me that I
Yes.
wrote that. I for
Good.
yeah.
Can I just ask, most people that come through to you, of course, you wouldn't talk about things in detail, but generally, what stage are people at? Are they just thinking about whether they're bi or not? Or are they navigating something within the relationship and having told someone, or is it just a mix?
Yeah. It's definitely a mix. I mean, I think people come to my podcast with a lot of the like, am I bisexual energy? Like, what is bisexuality? What does this mean? I when people read the book and eventually come to me for coaching, there's some people at that stage like, what is this? I've worked with a few like younger guys who are there. I would say the majority of people coming to me for coaching are a little bit further where they recognize that they are bi. They've come to this conclusion. Maybe they don't know exactly what that will look like in their lives, but they want to integrate it somehow, or they want to figure out how to share it and figure out how to kind of apply it practically and live that experience. So yeah, most of the people coming for coaching are like, how they're at that how stage. How do I integrate this? How do I come out in a way that feels safe and empowering? That's I work with a lot of people on like coming out. Maybe they're already out to their partner, but coming out to their family, coming out to their kids. That's a big one I work with people on. And then, coming out at work. And the big thing actually now is like, okay, maybe they're out to like their close friends or their family. How do I navigate being a bi person in the world? Because everyone assumes you're straight. So, like, do I come out to every single person I meet? Like, how do I make sure I'm not hiding it, but also
Mm.
not like blasting a megaphone and running around your office saying, I'm bi, I'm bi?
Yeah.
Like, where's the balance there? I think that's what people are trying to find.
Yes, I suppose without making it more of an issue than it is to someone. In some ways, there's a lovely ordinariness about saying to someone, and they just say, "Oh, okay." Anyway, my
Mhm.
sister's da 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 da. That and it isn't made a
Yeah.
very significant issue because for people up until that point in their own minds, it may have been the most dominant thing. But for it to be there and not really
Yeah.
matter is also
Right.
can be a lovely thing, can't it? I think.
Totally. And when I first came out, I was like shouting it from the rooftops. It was all I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Any person I saw, if I went out to dinner with my parents and their friends, I wanted to tell them. Like
Yeah.
I was like a
Still wasn't
little,
enough, so you did a podcast. It's
yeah, I did shared everything on a podcast. I went a little bit
okay.
overboard and I'm glad I did that and it was part of my journey and what I needed, but like now I've settled at a more balanced place. Yes, I'm very publicly bisexual. It's part of my book and my podcast and my brand, but I don't like say it to every single person I meet. I like when it comes up, I'm natural and fine and I share it, but I don't have to tell people if it doesn't come up. And that, I struggled with that for a while. Like, am I
Mhm.
hiding? If it doesn't come up, is that hiding? And it's different for each person, and you can find that balance eventually.
Mhm. Just going back to something you said about coming out to children, well, presumably, maybe not adult children, actually, could be younger. What kind of things do you say
Yeah.
about that?
Well, in coaching, I really follow my client's energy and I try not to give advice. I can share my experience and I don't have kids yet, but it's always about what will work for the client. And so, what I really try to explore with guys who have kids who are thinking of coming out is like, why is it important to you to come out to your kids? And there's always an answer. Like it's always important to them to do this. It's really ends up then being a matter of like when and how and what, once you establish why is it important, like what's holding you back from doing it now. And sometimes that's an internal reason that's your work to do. And sometimes it's like, well, my kid is like going through this thing right now and I don't want to burden them, but after the school year ends, then I'm ready to do it. And that can be like a caring way to sort of make sure the container and the space is right.
Mm.
But, there's always a good answer to why is it important. And like a lot of times when I work with parents on this, tears will flow when they realize why it's important. And it's like they wanted that example when they were kids.
Sure.
Their life might have been so different if they had a parent or just mentor figure saying, I'm this and it's okay and you can be whatever you are. Or
Mm.
they want their kid to have the options and see that. And also, sometimes they just want their kid to know them
Yeah.
authentically and to
Mm.
actually be know the true them. And so there's so many great reasons. And I think eventually, like most people who come out to their partner will eventually come out to their kids. It's just kind of a matter of why and how and when.
Mm. I mean, interesting what you were just saying there about being a role model. Because when I was talking to Mark Cusack, you spoke to him as well a couple of times. I think you
Yeah,
have, and
he's
I,
great.
I said about the why bother. It's probably not a very nice way of saying it. It's only, but why would somebody? And he said, well, it's for other people, for younger people. That is a tough one, isn't it? Because most of what will stop people is fear. For somebody to override fear for someone they don't know, to be a role model for people that they don't know, that's quite a tall
Yeah.
order. I thank goodness for inspirational people that do that. But I guess we all as well grow up in environments perhaps where some people have a sort of safer environment potentially, perhaps physiologically. They're not as
Yeah.
anxious. Who knows? Right? Genetic
Yeah.
differences, religion, that the environment. Some people grow up more anxious, grow up more frightened, grow up feeling less safe than other people, and that yeah. But
Yeah.
people are safe enough to do that for people they don't know. I just think it's
Yeah.
an
Right.
amazing thing. I don't think it's lots of human beings because I think
Yeah.
we are programmed to survive rather than to be happy. We're programmed really to make sure we don't die, physically,
Right. Right. Right.
psychologically. So, yeah.
Right. Well, safety is a huge issue. And like, yes, if you, especially if you're like coming out to parents or something, that can be not safe because they're the ones protecting you. And some people, when they know this, might not want to protect, will want to harm you. Like there's so much homophobia. So definitely safety is like huge. And you should only come out if and when you feel it's safe to do so. And I think that's part of why so many people are still closeted is because we're not in a safe container in this world for many people. I also think as like for parents, a lot of the reasons holding people back from coming out to their kids, they'll think like, oh, well, this is just about sex and what kind of sex I like. And why would I talk to my kid about that?
Mm.
And there's a bit to unpack about like sex negativity in there. It's like, what, why shouldn't we be talking to our children about sex when it's age appropriate? Like sex is a normal, natural thing. And we have all this shame about sex that's unnecessary. But that aside, sharing your sexuality and your identity is actually about so much more than sex. And you
Mm.
don't even have to talk about sex with your kid to talk about your identity and gender and all of and like attraction. Like that's actually very fundamental to who we are regardless of sex, and kids are navigating that before you think, even well before they're having sex. They're navigating relationships and attractions. And to have a role model and an example of just like someone who loves and accepts themselves as they are, that's so valuable for kids. And it really can change the world, even and can change people's lives who you don't know. It can ripple out from there. And so that decision to be authentically yourself without shame will start to affect people that you don't even realize the more out you are. And it's a gift to you. Part of why I want to come out is to help other people. But like it's given me so much to be out and to be unashamed. It's changed my energy and my life. So it's also a gift to myself.
Definitely. Yes. There were some things that I wanted to talk about. And I thought there was one thing that was there, and I thought, oh, we're not going to get to talk about it. But Rob, you just mentioned it, so which is great. You said about sex negativity and about shame around sexual behaviour. It's an interesting one, that isn't it? Because I read that book by Dr. Julia Shaw. I mentioned it when I was talking to Mark. Actually, at no point in it, interestingly, does she mention the kind of perhaps addictive sexual behavior, cruising, that kind of thing, which can be a part of, if you're looking at men within marriages, it can, can be a part of life. And when you split something off and it's repressed, then it can get out of control in some ways,
Yeah.
become quite an extreme form. There are books and there's a movement in the UK, maybe there is in the US, I imagine at LA, New York, about not pathologizing in some ways sexual behavior, but she says, but there is that sort of acknowledgement that certain behavior can become addictive, and people, in the same way that we can get dependent on any behavior and substance, it is a part of some people's experience, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Like it's one I haven't fully thought through, so I'll give you my first thoughts now, but there's like a lot there in that what you just said is really interesting and fascinating. And like, yeah, I do let me start with me and we'll see where that goes. I do feel like when I was exploring sex with men before I was out,
Mm,
it was a little bit of an addiction and a compulsion,
mm,
and the thrill of it paired with the shame of not sharing it with anyone and having to hide it did created a lot of dissonance in me, and it created these scenarios and settings where like I was exploring something I wanted to, but I wasn't yet like being my authentic self about it. I was still kind of locked up in doing it a certain way and maintaining a certain public identity. And it was compulsive. And that like, when you're doing it and not talking about it, when there's any disconnect there, you start to get comfortable with hiding and lying. And that leads to cheating in relationships often. And, most non-monogamy is non-consensual. Like a big percentage of people cheat and just don't talk about it. And people who are actually non-monogamous are, the ones who are actually talking about it. But there's, half of marriages are non-monogamous and just like most of them just don't admit it.
mm,
And that just yeah, I mean, that leads to all sorts of issues internally and within the marriage. And once I started coming out and being more open, and the more and more open I am about everything, the more present I am in those sexual encounters and the more connected I can be and the more true to myself and what I want I can be. Like I used to say yes to things that were kind of related to what I wanted, but not exactly. And, or I wasn't totally into the person. And I just felt like, well, this is the only way to do it. And now that I'm like more open, I can actually be upfront with people and be more
mm.
selective with people whose energy I'm not
Sure.
aligned with and find what really turns me on. And, just everything about it can be more real.
Mm. And when you say selective, I guess that's choice, isn't it? Rather than a compulsion, which is to experience doing something without choice.
I mean, I'm probably like hooking up with other people outside my marriage less frequently than I used to
Mm,
because yeah, there's something related in there. Like I definitely have more freedom of choice.
mm.
And it doesn't mean like I'm not hooking up with other people, but I'm more intentional about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting subject.
Yeah.
Joys, benefit. I did hear a question asked on Bisexual Brunch. I think it was Ashley asked somebody, and it's only because I would work with a number of bisexual clients, and I do notice certain personality types in some ways. I just wonder, from your point of view, I did ask Robin the question as well, and she came up with something. But do you think there are sort of some personality traits of people who would identify bi plus? And I realise fully bi plus covers such a range of people in some ways, even in terms of
Yeah.
romantic, where people are 90-10 and it moves and it's fluid. But I just wondered whether that was something you may have noticed.
Yeah. I think because of that diversity, it's hard to pinpoint like personality traits to some extent. So the only one that I do think sort of comes along with a bi fluid identity is like openness,
Mm,
openness to experience, openness to ideas, and also sort of like a trust in other people's experiences. The bi experience, you almost have to see the world in shades of gray to acknowledge bisexuality in yourself. And so you tend to then look at the world less black and white and less binary. And that kind of leads to an openness of like, looking at things as they are and exploring
yes.
things, seeing things as valid, whatever they are, and not categorizing and not judging. And that just kind of manifests in like an openness and a curiosity I've seen, and an openness to experience. Not everyone, but in general.
Mm,
And then also just like because we've experienced the world in a fluid or spectrum way that often comes with shame and stigma and people telling you, no, you have to choose a side. Well, once you go through that, you tend to believe other people when they share an experience of not fitting into a box or, not conforming. And so there's a trust and there's a
mm,
yeah, all of those things are kind of related in a cluster of just like curiosity,
mm,
openness,
yes, yeah.
believing other people's experience.
Mm.
That's what I would say. I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
curious. What did
it's quite
what did
similar.
Robin say?
Quite similar. She said about the openness, not seeing things in a binary way. Definitely, the first parts that you were saying was almost exactly what she said. So, yes,
I learned
it
from the
must be the
best.
right answer, probably.
I learned
um,
from the best. Yeah.
can I just move on a little bit to community? Actually, I mean, we've talked about relationships within the romantic relationship, perhaps children, family, a little bit wider there. Anything that you would say? I mean, I have talked about it in a bit more detail with a couple of other people. So there will be in this sort of series people talking about the kinds of online communities there might be and podcasts and all those sorts of things. Because of course we can have a sort of social relationship listening to Rob on a podcast.
Yeah.
But what would you say about community?
It's so important.
Mm,
It's more important than you realize, unless you're already in by community, in which case you probably understand.
yeah.
Um, I by community is the reason I came out. That was what helped me accept myself. I went to this discussion group in New York City called By Request. Before I was out to anyone, I was in this room talking to people, and it did something to me that reading 1,000 articles online and listening to 100 podcasts couldn't do. Like
Mhm.
being in a physical room with other people who identified as bi and just seeing them exist and be happy and talk about this as if it were normal, that clicked something in me that made it real for me and made me realize I can really do this and be this. Because look at them, they're right here, they're real, they're doing it. I can too. And so like it's really a helpful first step. Like actually go out there and meet people. It will unlock
Mhm.
things in you. And then on an ongoing basis, it's important too because we're constantly confronted with biphobia and homophobia and like shame around this stuff from the world and from right-wing
Mhm.
politics and like being with people who just get it, who you don't have to explain it to, is so validating and so healing. And so like a lot of guys I work with, like, yeah, they finding a group is great. If you can find a group, that's amazing. But sometimes you live in a place where there isn't a group, or there's a group that tries to get together and two or three people show up. Well, guess
Mhm.
what? Even one other bi person is valuable, like in person, not just online. But I've met people and worked with people who have one bi friend and they go out for coffee once a week or once a month. And
Yeah.
just that connection is so important. Even if
Yeah.
you don't talk about being bi, just
Yeah.
being with someone who gets it is really validating. And so, like, part of what I want to do with my coaching and where I'm trying to expand it is to create more community and create more spaces for people to just meet each other and come together. And, in my coaching at the moment, that's going to be virtual, but anyone out there listening, like, Start the buy group. People will
Mm.
show up. The more you put yourself out there, the more you will find
Yeah,
there are buy people all around you who may or may not be out, and they may be looking for this also. And so
sure.
start small, but it can build. And this in-person buy community is a really important thing that I want to help inspire and cultivate over the next few years. Like there are gay spaces and lesbian spaces and bars all over the place. There are very few dedicated bi spaces, and queer spaces that are more broad are wonderful and we need that. But right now I think we also need, affinity spaces for bi people, because
Sure.
like it hasn't existed, and it's a key that unlocks things, and then we can expand it outward to the queer community at large. But like for
Mm.
many of us bi people, that specific bi community and connections are a key that can unlock stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Robin said a similar thing. You know, if it's not there, why don't you try and start it? And also about
Yeah.
content. You said it yourself about the podcast, actually. You created the content that just wasn't, that you wanted to hear, but wasn't there very successfully. So, I mean, it is people overcoming their own internal fears and that kind of thing, isn't it? But perhaps doing that online, there's a disinhibition effect which comes from online.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like all about the in person right now, but the virtual community is like so important too.
Sure.
And, maybe it's just me that thrives off the in person, and for other people, the less inhibition virtually can.
The benefits of face to face, I think it can't replace face to face. I think online can it, although there is just something about being in person with someone that is very different. Just a couple of questions left, if that's okay.
Cool.
But is there any particular advice you'd give to someone who is at the early stages of thinking about their bi identity?
I mean, the first thing I would just say is like, bisexuality is real and it's valid. Like, I want to acknowledge and validate it. And like, if you feel crazy for having these thoughts, that makes sense. You're not alone. Like, we live in a world that makes it seem and feel crazy sometimes, but it's real and it's totally normal. In fact, it might be extremely common. And so like, okay, start there. And then I would say like, once you can accept that and like be okay with that, because it is okay, then like check in with yourself and find out what it means to you. Because
Mhm.
bisexuality is, by definition, this really broad, fluid thing. And it's not like straightness or gayness. Like it's not exactly like those things, because it encompasses a spectrum and it means different things to different people. And that's part of it. And so the next thing I would do for people at those early stages is like, once you've done your research,
Mhm.
get quiet with yourself. Do some yoga, do some meditation, do some breath work, like whatever you do to get in touch with yourself. Go to church or temple, like something religious. Go for a walk in nature. Whatever it is that gets you in touch with yourself, do that and ask yourself these questions like, why is this important to you? What does this mean? What do you want? Like, what do you want it to mean? Because
Sure.
sometimes people are worried about what it means, but it means whatever you want it to mean.
Mhm.
And you get to write the story. Like, there's no rules in this. That's like what bi is. Anything is possible. And so, try to get quiet and get in touch with yourself. And whatever comes up for you there is valid and real, and follow it.
Mhm.
You can trust yourself. It's so hard to trust yourself as a bi person because it doesn't fit with a lot
Mhm.
of what we're told, but
Sure.
trust yourself.
Absolutely. Fantastic advice. I mean, just generally in life, I think that's fantastic advice. Thank you. And of
Yeah.
course, read your book.
Yeah. And then read my book and, follow my podcast and sign up for coaching with me. All that stuff. Yeah. That's helpful.
Just the last question, I would say a piece of life advice generally. What's your favorite piece of life advice?
Oh my God. Where do I even begin? I guess it just like what I'll say for this, the first thing that's coming up for me is just like going back to that authenticity. YOLO. Like, actually, I actually don't know if we only live once. Who knows what happens after this? But like, we know we have this life. We know we're here. Like, why not be yourself?
Mm,
Do you want to get to the end and not have been who you are? Like, what, for what reason? To get achieve a goal that you think you have to be a certain way? Like, is that really the goal that's right for you in this life? Like, try to get in touch with yourself, because why not? You have this chance. We have this life at least. And why not just be yourself? Whatever it is the way it's supposed to be and the way we were made. And like, there's a lot of going on in this world and politics and, structures in place that, like, you know, they're hard and they're designed to test us. And like, what you feel and know inside you is more true than the
sure.
things we're taught. And so like, find that, be that, and then it will spread out, and that can heal the world. Heal yourself first, because that'll be good for you. And
Mhm.
then doing that will help heal the world too.
Yes.
So,
Well, you're
yeah,
certainly walking the walk, Rob, with all of that.
trying.
I think. Thank you
Okay.
so much. I mean, it's been absolutely amazing. As I say, your book is
Yeah,
amazing. So we will put the link to that. I will review it as well once I've listened to the
cool.
next 5 hours of it, which I'm looking forward to. But as I say, I think it's brilliant. So anyone listening to this,
Amazing.
please do give it a listen. I think it's well worth it. We'll put a link to your website and any other social media links and all that kind of thing. Of course, your reels of you telling jokes and playing a guitar or banjo. I don't know
Oh yeah.
which one.
Ukulele.
Ukulele. There we go. Hey, brilliant. The ukulele. We should have got that on earlier.
I just wrote a song about cruising that
Me
is
too.
I'm playing all over town. It's it's very fun. It's very fun for me, and it's authentic to me. I don't know. I'm sharing a lot of crazy stuff in that song. But yeah,
Good for
check it out.
you. I would ask you to sing it, but it wouldn't be monetized. So
Go. You can find my YouTube and social media. We'll link
brilliant.
it there. And
So
yeah,
we'll put those links. Yes, and thank you so much again. It's been great. I really appreciate it.
yeah. Thank you. This is a really interesting discussion. I appreciate that you're platforming this stuff, and like, some of the questions you asked me are new things that I haven't quite thought about, that I'm going to think about more. So
Brilliant.
thank you.
Sounds
Yeah.
great. Okay. Thanks again. You take care.
Thanks for having me. This was great.